What we're going to start to take a look at throughout the rest of this video is how we can start to organize and display data of these two different types, qualitative data and quantitative data. Remember that this is one of the important parts of descriptive statistics, which again is really the focus here in Chapter 2. So let's take a look here at how we can display qualitative data. So I'm going to skip over these definitions here. We'll come back to these in just a moment. Let's look ahead here to example number 2. Okay, let's suppose a therapist wants to determine the types of rehabilitation required by her patients. So to do so, she obtains a simple, random sample of 24 of her patients and records the body part that's requiring rehabilitation. Okay, so you can see here that we kind of have a list, and I was nice enough to kind of already go ahead and organize this so all the different responses that are the same are right next to each other. Now let's take a look here at part A, which says let's fill in the following. Okay, so first off, I should be able to very easily and quickly identify the population of the study. Who are all of the people that this physical therapist is interested in studying? Well, that would be pretty easy. The therapist wants to determine the types of rehabilitation required by her patients. So this would be all of the patients of this physical therapist. That's what we're working with here. Notice that the sample would just then be the 24 selected patients. Okay, so we're going to learn something about all the patients that this therapist has by maybe looking at just a few of them, right? Just 24 of them. Now, here's the important idea from this section. What variable was the data collected for? Remember, that's kind of like I can think about a question, and the answers to that question should be here in the box. Now, I can think about this in terms of what question would I ask to get these types of responses, and I obviously want that to make sense with the idea that the physical therapist wants to know the type of rehabilitation required by the patient. So what could I ask the patient to get these sorts of responses? Well, I could maybe ask something very simple, like, what body part requires rehabilitation? That would exactly get me these answers, right? Like I could go to patient 1. Hey, what body part requires rehabilitation for you? Oh, and they say back, something like that. Now, I can also ask, what type of variable? Notice when I say type, I'm talking about qualitative or quantitative. Well, again, I can think about the answers to my question, and I can look at my data, and I can see that this is definitely going to be a qualitative variable. Okay, so what we want to do then in part B is to think about how we can begin to organize this, and we want to create what we would call a frequency distribution. Now, that sounds like it's a really fancy piece of terminology, but it's really not. It's unbelievably simple. What a frequency distribution is literally just a list of some different categories of the responses that we have and their frequencies, or how often they actually occur. So this is just going to be a very simple table that's going to be used to help organize the information that we have up here. On the category side, we're actually going to go ahead and list down all the different types of responses that we had. If you look at the table up above, you'll see that we had some people respond with back as the part requiring rehabilitation, some with hip, some saying it was their knee, others saying neck, and some people saying shoulder. And we could easily go through that table up above and kind of count up the number of individuals that responded with each of these different categories. Now you can go ahead and double check my numbers on here, but I believe that if you counted from the table above, you would see 11 people responded back, 3 responded with hip, 5 responded with knee, 1 responded with neck, and I have 4 for shoulder. Now, of course, if I added all of these numbers up, I better get to a grand total of 24, because that's how many people I actually surveyed, so I better have 24 responses in there. And of course, you can see that I definitely do if you double check that. So that tells me how to create what we call a frequency distribution. But how do I go ahead and create what we would call a relative frequency distribution? Well, this is also very, very simple. We're still going to have categories on one side of our little table. And in fact, they're the exact same categories. I have back, hip, knee, neck, and shoulder. But on the other side of the table, instead of just counting how many individuals, we're going to count what we call the relative frequency, which is going to actually be the same thing as really just calculating a percentage of people. So notice that for back, I can say that there were definitely 11 people who said that their back needed rehabilitating, but that's out of 24 individuals. And so I have a percentage of people that responded with back. Now I'm going to go ahead and take these values and I'm going to round them off, type them into a calculator and round them off. I'm going to be doing rounding, and I'm going to ask you to do rounding always in this class to 4 decimal places. Always 4 unless otherwise specified. So if I was to round 11 over 24 to 4 decimal places, I get 0.4583. For hip, notice that would be 3 people out of 24. And you'll notice that up above, I had this kind of squiggly equal sign because I had to round off this value. Notice though that if you type 3 over 24 into a calculator, there's no need to round. You can actually just type out the full value, and so I don't put in a squiggly equal sign. I put in exactly equal. Squiggly equal kind of says that 11 over 24 is roughly-ish this value. Let's keep going here. 5 over 24. This is going to be a number I'm going to have to round off if I look at the decimal. But this is going to be 0.2083-ish. Neck would be 1 person out of 24 responded this way, 0.0417. And then finally, 4 out of 24 for shoulder, which is roughly 0.1667. Okay, so hopefully you can go to a calculator, confirm those decimal values. The interesting thing is that if I was to add up all of these values, like add up all these decimals, the value that I should get back should be roughly 1, or kind of standing for like 100%. Now the reason I say roughly is that based on some rounding, it may be the case that you might not completely add up to the value of 1. You may get close, but rounding error might exist somewhere in here that causes this value to go slightly above or slightly below the number 1. Now, once I have these sorts of distributions made, it's unbelievably simple to start to organize this stuff into a picture. Now, I'm very rarely, if ever, going to ask you to create a picture like this, but you should be able to create one if you were asked. We're going to see down here on the next page that we have graphs when we're dealing with one type of qualitative variable that help us to at least just quickly visualize everything that we just saw in a table. So one of the types of graphs we can make for a qualitative variable is what we call a bar graph. So you can see here, I have 2 different types of bar graphs. You can see on this horizontal axis, I have all my different categories listed. And on the vertical axis, I either have frequency or relative frequency listed. Now, if I was making one of these graphs by hand, I would just do my very best to just kind of roughly eyeball what the picture looked like. I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to carefully create this by hand. Notice, though, what's kind of interesting is that both these pictures look pretty much identical, even though they have a different vertical axis scale. And that's always going to be the case when I create these 2 different types of pictures. The other sort of graph that I might be able to make with a qualitative type of variable is a pie chart. And I can tell you right now, I will never ask you to make a pie chart in this class by hand. I won't even ask you to make it via technology. But we should be able to interpret what a pie chart says. And so you can see here, I can kind of list out my different percentages into these different little wedges that help to make up the corresponding 100% for all the different types of responses that we've had. So it's not necessarily super important, again, that you're able to create a picture like these, although again, I think if I asked you to make a bar graph, you should be able to. But more importantly, that I understand that these 2 types of graphs, the bar graph and the pie chart, are graphs that I would use when I am specifically dealing with qualitative variables.